Hi, my name is Ekta. I'm the author of the book The Voice of Kali and the co founder of Author in Me. I conduct a video podcast called Inspiring Conversations, and I've been very lucky to have met some very interesting people throughout these conversations. Now, this year, um, as the year dawned, I had a feeling in my heart, a strange kind of excitement. Now, if you know me, you will know that I start my day by writing something. I cannot begin my day without actually putting something on the paper, something that I'm working on, or a new thought, or an article. And lately, I found myself writing a lot about multiple dimensions, a universe that I really don't know about. Considering that this is my spiritual approach towards writing, and let it channelize and let those teachings come. And I somehow feel that when you're writing with that, by connecting to a higher energy, it's meditation in a form. You know how in meditation you get a certain kind of new knowledge. That happens to me while writing. But this time, while writing about these multiple dimensions, I made a wish. I made a wish that I must speak to someone who has actually experienced this. And as if the universe was listening, I found myself reading a book called, which I ordered a long time back, but I hadn't really read it. It was called My Journey Through Lifetimes. It was a spiritual memoir by Dena Merriam. And I started reading that book. Something within me told me this is the time to read it. And as I was reading it, I was amazed. I was amazed at the similarity of the journey that Dina has gone through and I have gone through. There isn't similarity in our experiences, but there is a similarity in the patterns. Dina Merriam is an author of the book, The Untold Story of Sita. It's a beautiful book. It shows Sita as a very empowering goddess. And she's also written her spiritual memoir where she writes about the past lives that she has been able to see. I think she's written about 12 lives in that book, or maybe 7, I'm forgetting. But the amazing thing is the detail with which she remembers not just the lives, but also what happens between one life and another. That completely struck a chord with me. I do not see past lives the way she does, but yes, I have been able to see some of the past lives. And also, what amazed me was the way she was guided by her guru Yogananda. And I believe I'm guided by my guru, Swami Vivekananda. So certainly I was intrigued. It was almost like the universe is telling me, you asked for someone and here it is. And I got in touch with her, sent her an email telling her that there's a lot of similarity in our patterns of life. And thank you so much for sharing your stories. And, as they say, the more you know, the more humble you become. And very beautifully, she replied back. And we ended up talking for almost an hour initially, sharing our experiences. And I was very grateful to Universe when Dina agreed to be a guest for my Inspiring Conversations podcast. It's a very interesting conversation because it takes us through many dimensions. If you are a believer in reincarnation or past lives, it is something that you will understand. Even if you don't believe in past lives, there are some very beautiful lessons of life that Dina has gathered. There are some beautiful perspectives that she has gathered in her life, and that is just as amazing as the experience itself. And like I said, Dina is someone I see as someone who has had an expanded vision or version of the vision that I go through. So for me, it was very special because I've never actually met someone who has had similar experiences to me. And it as much as I hold on to the faith of what I believe in, what I feel, it's always good when after 45 years, universe sends you someone who has walked the same path as you. So very grateful to universe for this conversation, and I want to really invite you all to understand the lessons that we must learn through these past lives. Um, I would recommend not getting too much into the logic behind how she sees and what she sees. It's important to let that knowledge which we are not ready for stay there. What's important is to gather what we can grab out of that experience. I always say this, that it's like a stream. These experiences that others get, someone experiences that you don't get, as spiritual experiences that other people get, they are like stream of ocean, and it's upon us to pick the pearls from it, the pearls of knowledge from it, which work for us. We shouldn't be really bothered about the origin of the ocean and where the ocean is going and why the ocean is so wide. Our job is to pick the pearls of knowledge that work for us, for the place of spiritual growth where we are. And that is all spiritual evolution is all about. Understanding others' experiences in a way that they mean something to you and embedding them in your life so you may expand your perception. So I hope you all will enjoy this wonderful podcast with Dena Merriam. And again, stay connected to whatever truth you believe in. Stay connected to whichever place you find your peace. Stay connected there, because where there is peace, happiness will automatically sprout there. Thank you so much.
The whole point is to kind of tell people that this exists. And people may not be able to see it, but there is an alternate reality to what the world we have.
I think that I view the whole law of cause and effect of karma and rebirth as a scientific law. It's not a matter of belief. And I think that science is on the verge of confirming this. There've been, I wasn't aware because I don't follow the studies. For me, it's just my own experiences. I write about my own experiences. But when my first book came out, Journey Through Time, I got a call from a friend of mine who is a Christian theologian. And he said he'd read the book and wanted to talk to me about it. And I was a little nervous because, in the Abrahamic world, it's not an accepted reality. But he told me he read the book and he was so moved by it that he started researching. And then he suggested books on the topic of rebirth, which gives so many instances and cases of people remembering things that have been verified. So from my point of view, I'm not interested. I don't need to verify, so I didn't need to pursue the subject. But from a Western point of view, this research is now available. And there are many, many books, many analysts. So this book he told me about was by a professor of religion, some university in the Midwest, who was also a psychologist. And he talked about all the studies that have been done to verify it's not an uncommon experience for people to have flashes.
No.
Often they don't know, they don't understand, or they don't know how to process it. And so it just lies there or passes to get back to their daily life. But I think we're on the verge of a real transformation in our understanding of life and death.
I think so too. I mean, beginning from where your story started, I read your book, Journey Through Lifetimes, which was a spiritual memoir. And I instantly saw that there is something in that book which tells me that I'm not alone. When I read that book, I instantly saw that the way you have written your story with such candid approach, I could see that there is genuine honesty in it, and there is a genuine need, there is a genuine intention to tell people that this is my story, this is it. You may believe it, you may not believe it, which is where my approach is. But like you said, for many people, these flashes come. They are given these signs by the divine world or the universe, but they don't often recognize it. They often let it go as a coincidence. The logic takes over. When their mind is more prominent, it takes over. But for someone to recognize these thoughts, how did you recognize it? But before I ask you this question, I want to first introduce you to my listeners. So, welcome to Inspiring Conversations, and my name is Ekta Bajaj, and the author of the book, The Voice of Kali, which is an empowering book for women with a lot of spiritual instances. And when I read this book, The Untold Story of Sita and My Journey Through Lifetimes, written by Dena Merriam, I was instantly taken aback that there could be a life that could be running almost parallel to mine, but not in such intensity. I don't have such intense vision as she has, and I immediately got in touch with her. So I want to introduce Dena Merriam here, the author of these wonderful books, and she's also the founder of Global Peace Initiative for Women. So thank you so much for joining us today and talking to us about the lessons that we can learn through lifetimes. So Dena, in her book, has written about the past lives that she's been able to see, the lessons that you've been able to gather, and which is what brings me back to the first question. So when did you first recognize your first vision to be actually something profound and not an imagination? I mean, I remember when I was little, I was as young as I think 9-year-old when I had my first vision, and I didn't know what to do about it. So when did you recognize this in your life?
Well, like you, when I was young, I had flashes, but they were just flashes. They weren't. And then you see with children that there are remnants from their life just previous to this. So when I was very young, sometimes in my dreams, I would dream in French. That was the language I spoke in my previous birth. And I would dance in my dreams. I was an aspiring ballet dancer in my previous birth also. But they gradually, and I've seen this with my own children, that their previous births are sort of very strong when they're in their early years. But then as you come more fully into your current identity, they move into the background. So this happened, and it was really, I began my meditation practice when I was about 20. I found my guru, Yogananda, began a meditation practice. And it was after a number of years of serious meditation that I had my first real vision of something, which is not part of that book. That experience led to the breakup of my marriage. And I, continued as a single mom, raising 2 kids, working, and doing my meditation practice. And then after some more years, I really began to be thrown back into my life just previous to this, and began having a full narrative. It was like watching a movie, being in the movie. It wasn't just glimpses. It was being in the movie, hearing conversations, interacting with people, going through all the emotions. So I became that girl again. And when I was married to a psychiatrist. So naturally, I doubted myself, even though I, was well embedded in my spiritual tradition and my meditation practice. I said to myself, Dena, could this be real? And so I checked myself out. I went to places that I had seen in my meditations. Went to the place where I saw that I had died. And I went to Russia to look for the place where I thought I had been born, St. Petersburg. And so I checked it out. Mm-hmm. And then there was a man in my current life who was part of that previous birth, who would say things to me that were out of the blue. I mean, not relevant for this life, but that were clearly from the past. He was not conscious of it all. He was just a businessman who was working with me. And so he, in a way, he was, I have found that there has always been for me a stimulus. I go to a place or I meet a person from another time that awakens something, shakes up. And so for the first, and then after I saw that life, there was a bit of a pause after I had worked everything through. And then the life just previous to that, I met somebody who kind of awakened that life just previous to that one. And again, I checked myself out. I mean, I initially went through a process with a sort of like a scientific mind of checking things out, the things that I was seeing. Like names would come to me that I didn't know, that I had no idea about. I would look it up, and sure enough, there was a place with that name. That's what I mean by checking out. I would check what I was seeing against actual facts. Did that place exist? At that time, did this happen? So I stopped doing that after a certain point, because I realized that the important thing, it didn't really matter whether this detail was accurate. The most important thing were the teachings that were coming through. Amazing teachings were coming through to me that was completely changing me, completely changing my relationship with death. We all have an instinctive fear of death. It was completely changing that, completely changing my understanding of my current life and what my work was, and also who I was. Because after I had seen 5 or 6 lifetimes, I said to myself, well, who am I? Am I Dena, the interfaith organizer, or was that woman who wanted to be a ballet dancer, or the woman who was a teacher, or the woman in Africa, or the woman in India? Who am I?
Interesting. I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from. As I was growing and I was getting these visions, I could see there was such a chaos in my mind. In a way, it was almost like living in two worlds. You're in a very your safe space becomes a world that's unknown, that no one else can see, that no one else can understand. And that becomes your place where you can just go to and interact with these, some energy, which probably doesn't even respond back immediately, but you just find that ease to probably speak to these people, those energies, than to people around you. And sometimes that can be lonely. So did you have someone to speak to as you were going through this, or was this a very lonely journey for you?
It's very hard.
Yes.
Before I started writing the books, it was very hard to speak to anybody about it. I had one satsang friend who I talked a little bit to. I told her I was having these experiences, which were very intense. I'd be sitting in a meeting and suddenly find myself back in Nazi Germany. Which, I died in Europe in the 1930s and 1940s, and experiencing all those emotions, and yet, and I would like miss things. I would blank out at the meeting. It's like I didn't know what happened at the meeting, and who could I talk to about it?
Yes. Exactly.
I can't say. I'm in another time zone, in another place. So fortunately, I had my guru, who was my guide through the whole thing, Yogananda. And that made all the difference in the world because I had been, this happened to me after I had really been his teachings had been deeply embedded in me. And he talks about this a lot, he talks about the astral worlds a lot. So this was all intellectually familiar for me, but now I was experiencing it emotionally. I was experiencing it as a lived reality. It's one thing to believe, yes, I believe we're reborn and I believe in all of that. It's another thing for it to be a lived reality.
Yes, I get you.
And when people say to me, well, I don't know, I say, well, I can understand. If you haven't experienced it, how can you know? If you don't experience it, how can you know? I experienced it. So to me, it's a lived reality. But I never try to convince other people, because I think that there are people who I've met who are having intense challenges in their life. And I don't normally advocate past life regression because I think it's always better when something arises organically. But there are some cases when you're very troubled by something and you can't get a handle on it yourself. I have one friend going through that now, and I've said, find somebody good who you can go through this process with, because maybe it will help you understand it better.
Why do you think these memories came to you? Did they help you overcome a challenge in this lifetime, or were they just coming to make you aware of your own existence as an eternal being? What was the need, do you think? Why?
It wasn't to overcome a challenge, because I wasn't facing a challenge at that moment or during that stage in my life. I think that I have had these openings previously in past births. So in past births, I've been able to access memories, and in my journey, and in When the Bright Moon Rises, I talk about one life where I experience a memory of 3 previous lives to that.
And were they the same that you saw in this life too? Or were they separate?
Well, yes, no, different lives, earlier, much earlier.
Wow.
I mean, my journey through time, the first book takes me back through 6 or 7 lives, 500 years. But when The Bright Moon Rises, it begins in the 700s in China and goes back in time, back there. So I've actually been able to sequence about 15 or 20 lives. So I've been able to follow my journey.
How intense, how interesting.
The reason I think it has come to me, so this is not the first life where this has happened to me. But the reason why now is because I'm in a position where I can write about it, whereas previously I couldn't. So I can share this. And my hope is that the teachings that I received will be shared and other people will get them. And I've talked about how it changed my whole relationship with what we call death. It also made me realize that deep love relationships survive from one incarnation to the next. Deep love relationships are something that has a long life to it.
Yes.
They're not just 50, 60 years. You meet those people again. It might not be in the next life. It might be 3 lifetimes. Whatever is unfinished becomes completed.
Wow.
It's a law of the universe. And the guides who I've encountered in the past are still with me today. So, for example, even in my journey through time, those guides are still with me today. I sometimes tune into them. And I've seen people reappear. I'm beginning to, because I do have somewhat of a scientific mind, I'm beginning to notice that some people show up in 3s 3 times.
Interesting.
So there are patterns. There are patterns. And it's, if you can step back out of your present life and look at it from sort of a divine perspective, look at the whole thing. And this is true of everybody. I'm just one example. It's true of every single person. It's magnificent. It's like a beautiful mandala with all these interconnections and interweavings. And you realize that there is ultimate justice in the universe. This question of good and evil, of justice, there is ultimate justice, but you have to look beyond one life to see it.
Interesting.
In the Rukmini book, which is going to come out soon, which is about Rukmini, the consort of Krishna, things that were started during the time of Sita find their conclusion during the time of Krishna and Rukmini.
Wow.
Like Subhadra, who was Krishna's sister, was Trijata, the one who looked after Sita when she was in the garden.
Oh my God. And then you suddenly see why.
And when I saw
that may have happened.
Yeah. And she was not destined, she was not supposed to marry Arjuna, but Sita had promised her, because she had looked after her and protected her, that in a future time Ram says she'll be born as his sister. And Sita promises that she'll unite her with the loved one she loves. Her husband was killed during the war with Ravana. And then she's born as Subhadra and marries Arjuna. She's born as Krishna's sister. So when you see the play And there are so many chapters in the play. You can't just see one chapter. You've got to see. There's so many aspects, the interconnections. And that's what I hope to convey, is to help people see the interconnections and the fact that the story keeps going on and on and on until everything is completed, and you can choose something else. You don't have to come back here.
You spoke of mandala, and I have this theory that, we all have if we were able to write or design our lifetimes, it would be in the form of a mandala, where everything, like you said, is interconnected, and there are many paths that we can take, many possibilities of one situation. One experience can give rise to thousands of possibilities. And until we choose the possibility that leads to our spiritual evolution, we keep coming back, we keep encountering these things. You have seen this. You have experienced this. Is that what happens? Is that what the whole thing is? You have to kind of complete your mandala, kind of choose the right path?
I mean, the cosmic law of the universe is one of balance. The universe is always seeking to balance itself. So every action, every thought, every word needs to find its complement, its balancing, right? That's the law of karma, this balancing. I don't look at the law of karma as a judgment or punishment. There's no one to punish us. We ourselves are part of this process of wanting to balance.
When you say balance, what do you really mean by balancing the good and the bad?
The universe, just like there's a law of gravity, where that of attraction, there's a law of balancing, of sort of harmonizing, reaching a state of harmony that the universe, by its nature, seeks.
Oh, okay, I get you.
At both the grand level and at everything that happens at the grand level also happens at the microcosm. The microcosm is just a sample of the macrocosm, right? So this seeking of harmony, a stasis really, works at the macro level, the micro level as well. So if we cause harm, or we have a desire, it's gotta find its fulfillment. The desire has to find its fulfillment. The harm we cause has to be balanced in some way. It doesn't have to be an exact duplication, but in some measure it has to balance. But karma is also patterns of behavior, ways of thinking. I noticed that one of the patterns of behavior which I had, which I think a lot of women had, was a lack of confidence, a lack of feeling my own worth. And this comes from, many centuries during the lower yugas of the oppression, of women not having a voice. And this is deep in our psyche. And so it takes many incarnations to overcome that, and to find your voice, and to really be able to express yourself as a woman.
Interesting. I did notice that you have spoken about all your birth as women, and all of them speak of divine energy. Now, I'm myself very much connected to the divine energy in feminine form itself, and I feel I don't get as detailed visions as you, but I have seen myself as a woman, how I have in past births stood up for myself in whatever small capacity I could. And probably that's why in this birth, I speak of empowerment. So, and I read your book. In every birth, you are trying to be the voice of women in some way or another. We carry this throughout our births, the strongest will, the strongest agitation in our heart. You think we carry that throughout our birth?
A question that's frequently posed to me is, do I remember a birth as a man?
Yes.
And in the Rukmini book, I follow 3 lifetimes. One of them is a man, because what needed to be done at that time, what I needed to do, could only be done through a man's body. And it was very interesting to me. It was the first time I really saw myself in a male body. And it made no difference, actually. It made no difference. I mean, I had a wife and children. it was very interesting for me to experience that. But I think that I've chosen, at least in the more recent times, to be born in a woman's body because of this desire, which came about through my experiences, to be a vehicle for uplifting women, because of the goddess, in my service to the goddess, to the Devi. It was through helping women that I was able to serve her.
And you spoke of spiritual guru, your Yogananda, and as I've mentioned, that I feel my spiritual guru is Swami Vivekananda, and that's how I saw him guiding me. That's something that really connected me to your book too. Our spiritual guides, do we have that one spiritual master throughout our lifetimes guiding us as a master? I mean, did you think you had Yogananda as your spiritual master in all your lifetimes since your birth?
He was not incarnated. I mean, usually the masters don't incarnate as frequently. When you get to a certain level, your incarnations are infrequent. It's not like every 100 years you're coming back. My Devata is really Ram, and that's the oldest. My oldest, deepest connection is to Ram, which I came into a relationship with Ram through Sita. Through Sita's eyes, I began to see Ram. Yogananda is part of that lineage. He's part of the Krishna lineage.
Yeah, Vaishnava.
And so I've had other teachers. There are teachers that one has, and then there's the guru who comes when you need those final teachings to help you fully awaken. That's when the guru appears. At other times, you have different teachers who can prod you awake, and each lifetime you might get a glimpse. You might see a little bit more. You get a little bit closer, and then when you're really ready to take the airplane route, to speed along, then you'll come in contact with the guru. I talk about that a little bit in the Rukmini book, but that relationship has been a predominant one in my life, the relationship with the guru. And I think it's one that sadly is not much understood today, because the marketplace is so crowded with people making so many claims.
Yes.
And especially with the internet, when anybody can go and present themselves. And so there's been a dilution. There's everything has a positive and a negative. The positive thing is the teachings are much more available. The downside is that it's difficult for many people to discriminate, and so, you can have a number of teachers, but then the guru has to be one who can really perform that transformation, that full awakening, the touch of full awakening. That helps you take a leap forward. So it's not just you're taking another step or getting a glimpse. You can really take a leap forward. You have only a powerful master can do that.
Interesting. But when you felt that you are being guided, and you saw everything else, did the question come to you, what next? Of course, you're sharing this with your books and everything, but did you ask yourself, am I coming back again? Is this my last birth? Is this it? Or what were the questions in your mind?
Well, there was a moment when I began to see my next birth, and then the birth after that.
Okay. 2
more births. And after I finished this book, I'm writing a book now that the first part takes place in 12th century Tibet, and the second part, and then a successive life in India. And I thought to myself, I don't know what's next. I mean, I've sort of written about a lot of lives. I thought of writing a book called Memories of the Future. Don't forget, past, present, and future are all happening now.
Now, in this very moment.
So if you live in the eternal now, of course, you see the future, there are probabilities because there are things that can change it, but there are probabilities that make it likely that things will unfold in a certain way. You know, I mean, my hope is that one returns not to fulfill personal karma, but to serve humanity. So that I don't see myself coming back and getting married and having a profession and just, doing that, but to truly be able to serve in a spiritual way, humanity, to be part of this uplifting of the vibration of the planet. I do think we're at an evolutionary moment on the planet where we have to evolve. If we don't evolve, between climate change and nuclear weapons and pandemics, I mean, there's so many converging factors that are coming at us to change our brain circuitry, so to speak, to help us change our worldview, change our understanding of how to live on the earth, caring for the earth, respectfully, the life in the earth, how to live with each other respectfully. So changes are needed and changes are coming. And, we have to serve that. To serve the divine, we have to serve that.
One more thing that came very profoundly while reading your book was the concept of oneness. So as I was reading it, the thought came that, you speak of, I'm a hardened believer in rebirth and everything, but like you said, it's one thing reading it and one thing experiencing it. I kind of somewhere went into some kind of an experience as I was reading your book. And I thought, well, so basically, we are the ancestors that we have been praying. I don't know if that made sense. If I was born 500 years back and I have a lineage going on, and then I'm born to someone connected to it. So somewhere I am my own ancestor. And that somehow made sense to me of how deeply connected we all are. And it's almost like recycling and coming back. And that came out so profound. So how do you see this as oneness? Because you have seen your birth, you've seen the connections, you've seen how you've come back. What does oneness mean to you?
Well, there's many levels to it. So I'll tell you an experience that I had. I was doing some work with the UN, with the Global Peace Initiative, when we had organized a summit of young leaders in Africa. We were in Senegal. And it was there that I began to have my visions of my life in Africa. And as I remembered my life in Africa, I had been killed during a slave raid, and a son had been captured and put on the slave ships. But I had a daughter and another son who survived. And I thought, well, I have a lot of descendants here. When I'm in that personality, I looked around at the young people and I wondered if some of them were my descendants.
Yes.
And then I thought about the children that I've had in my different lives. And I thought, wow, I've got descendants all over the world. So if you actually track, because I sort of knew how many children I had in the different lives. I didn't have children in my 2 previous lives, but going back, I did. Then there are lots of descendants.
Yes.
So, and there are many people who've been my mother, my father, my brother, my sister. I've interacted with a lot of the human race. So that is a sobering thought when you realize that. It makes you think of how connected in a real way, not just in a conceptual way. Yeah, we're all connected. In a very real way, we have all had some interaction with one another. But in the deeper sense, in the deeper spiritual sense, I see this world as a projection of the one cosmic energy, cosmic consciousness, projecting this multitudinous universe out. So when you awaken, what does it mean to be fully awakened? you're awakened into that reality, seeing yourself as not separate from that, but acting out in this drama, in this cosmic drama. You're acting out a part, and the parts keep changing, but you're still acting out the part, knowing that you're really the dreamer, that you're not separate from the dreamer. You're both the dream and the dreamer.
Interesting. Yes, of course. I mean, that's something we read, but reading some of the other lines, I actually experienced it for a moment. And I was like, I have never experienced oneness the way I'm experiencing it now. But that sense of connectedness. And also talking about, you speak of a very beautiful episode of guides who are guiding you after you've passed, in between the two lifetimes. What really happens? Do we really sit back and analyze what we have done? And do we say, oh my God, I was so nasty there. I really need to fix that. So how do we decide that we have to come back and really fix this one big karmic bond right here?
I think it works at an intuitive, organic level. So I think that I have often thought, putting myself into the future, I've written about all these other lives. What would I write about the life of Dena? In my journey through time, most of the lives take up 40 pages. In 40 pages, you can describe your life. There are highlights, right? There are key points where something happens that's important, that leaves an imprint. Because what is karma? It's some scars, it's imprints. Yes. It's impressions that have left with you that are significant enough that they leave their mark. So when you leave your body, at first there's no one way it happens. I think it's slightly different for everybody, but there's a general process by which your life passes through you, but it's the highlights. It's people who you've had intense relationships with. It's work things where you've really fulfilled something or not fulfilled something. It's the desires that have not been fulfilled. If you wanted to make a lot of money, you never could get ahead. You remain poor your whole life. Well, that desire is there, and that's going to impel you to making sort of the blueprint for your future life. You maybe come into circumstances where you can fulfill that desire, be born into a wealthier family, or choose a career path where you're able to fulfill a desire that you couldn't in the previous birth. But then we've gone through that process, and time is very different in that dimension. They say that a year here is a day there. So if you spend 20 years between births, and there's no set amount, it could be hundreds of years, it could be 10 years, it's no set time. But say it's 20 years, well, that's only 20 days in that realm. And many things happen. I talk a little bit more about it when the bright moon rises. There are 3 episodes that take place in that other dimension. And I'm now trying to look into it a little bit more closely.
Wow.
I feel that there's been a window open into that. And in the Rukmini book, it sort of explains a little bit more. It's funny, every book sort of takes things a little bit further. And in the book I'm writing now, I'm trying to focus in on that, onto. It's hard to find the words to describe that world. It's far more beautiful. It's of course, there's not one world. There are many different experiences that people can have depending on your consciousness. And some people maybe are not so happy in that world. They're pursuing this or that. I mean, there are as many different experiences as there are people, because everybody's consciousness is different. But the world that I see, that I visit, is a very beautiful one, and is more of a home than this world. It's almost as if that is the home and this is the coming out. So I don't even know what to call it. We call it the world between births, because there's no better way to describe it, really. But it's really more. We spend more time in that world than we do in this.
This seems to be like a training ground.
This is a school.
This is a school.
This is a school. This is a school. Yeah. And, there are many beings with whom they're familiar, because there comes a point where many of the great ones don't reincarnate. They have people that they work through. They have emanations. They have teachers that they can send messages through. Simply because there's other. So one of my questions these days is what do those beings do in that world, aside from helping Earth? Earth is one planet. There are many, many planets even in the physical universe. And so they're not just attending to Earth.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's the universe. So there's much to be done. I mean, there's the physical world, which encompasses the physical universe with all the galaxies and all the physical planets. There's the subtler world called the astral world, which is just another dimension, which our senses can't pick up. It could be right here, but our senses are limited in what they can see and what they can hear. Our senses have a very narrow ability to pick up frequencies, right? That's much larger than the physical world. And there are many planets within that world as well. And then there's the causal world, which is even subtler, which is really just the world of thought. And then beyond that is just pure consciousness.
And how far do you remember going in your visions? What worlds do you remember going?
Well, the world that I go to, that I'm most familiar with, is in the astral world. In other words, it's a subtler dimension than this, but I don't see it as part of. I mean, things. I'm still trying to peer into that world. This is sort of my new area of exploration, is to see it and understand it before I leave the physical body while I'm here.
I know. I mean, reading your book again, one thought came to me. I thought of we are lucky. I certainly feel that people who are able to see, even if glimpses of their past lives, or get messages through dreams, as I do, as you do, from our masters or meet teachers, and understands the spiritual world in a certain way. I suddenly had this urgency, this fear in my heart, and I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, oh my God, what if in my next birth, I'm completely oblivious of this whole spiritual thing, and I'm born as a complete ignorant? Am I wasting so much time? I have been given this vision. People who are spiritual or who have the seed to seek spirituality have been given that so that they do something about it. And next birth, I may not even remember that my guru was Swami Vivekananda or whatever has happened to me. And that it was more of a fear of losing out the memory of this lifetime than losing the people I am with. Is that normal?
I understand that. I have many times thought, well, suppose I have my memory in this life, suppose in the next birth I don't. But it doesn't matter, because it's a law of the universe that every spiritual effort, Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita, no step is lost on the spiritual path. So every step brings you a bit closer. There are people who completely abandon their spiritual efforts. I know people like that who earlier in life had a strong interest and start a practice, but then they completely get caught up in the material world and they just abandon it and don't have much spiritual interest anymore. Well, they may not be given the blessing of having that exposure early on in the next birth, but those who make a spiritual effort, it's sort of a given that will continue into the next birth. Krishna says that several times in the Gita, that you're born into a family of yogis.
Yes.
I was not born into a family of yogis, but in my next birth, I know that I will be, because I've seen my parents.
Have you? Oh, wow. And that must be reassuring then.
Well, I mean,
I would be reassured that I'm not going to lose all of my.
One still has to go through being born and the childhood of learning to walk. And I mean, you still have to go through that. But if you look at it from a distance, it's, the first 20 years, it's like 20 days. I've now begun to think of things like that. It's a very short time span where you have to learn how to maneuver through the physical universe. You have to learn to speak again. I mean, each time you have to learn it all over again, right? You're not born walking and speaking. So you have to go to school, you have to go through all those things. So but if the desire to serve, is strong enough, then it counters all of that. Yes, I'm willing to go through to serve the divine. I'm willing to go through all of that again. And that's the thing. I mean, it's when people sort of reject this notion of being reborn, I say to myself, yeah, sure, why not? You die and you go to heaven and you spend eternity there. Who wants to be reborn?
But sometimes, some people, that thought can be a little uncomfortable. What am I going to do? I mean, there's a sense of losing yourself. Okay, when you say you're going to be born again, there's a sense of saying, I'm coming back. And then suddenly you say, oh, so what? I'm going to be floating around somewhere. What's going to happen to me? So that thought can be sometimes disturbing for certain people. But is that what you're looking for? I mean, I certainly have started to think, like you just said, who wants to come back and go through all of that baggage of doubt and stuff like that again, to come to this point and then lose all of it again?
The reason to come back is to serve. And I think that at a certain point in one's spiritual journey, things get flipped. It's no longer my own search for knowledge. It's how can I serve? And that's the important flip that takes place. Of course, to come back to satisfy desires once you've experienced it all, what more is there to do, right? You've been rich, you've been poor, you've had love relationships, you've had disappointments. I mean, what else do you need to do? But there's still a lot of need here if you see the condition of the earth, and there's still a lot of awakening that needs to take place. And society needs transformation, new ways of living. The key to all of our problems that we're facing are spiritual. Without that, we're stuck. They're too grand. The problems are too massive, really. The only thing that will help the human community now is a spiritual transformation, a change in consciousness. That is what is called for. And there are many people who have to come work for that. That's not going to happen just, without the goodwill, the efforts of a lot of people. And I think that the masters are clearly guiding this process, not necessarily from here, but from other places, are guiding this process. Everyone wants to see the human species survive and thrive, but it has to evolve. We're not the end. We're not the end of the line. Humans are still evolving.
There's a book that I read that was Angels in My Hair by Lorna Bryan. I don't know if you've read it. She talks about she can see angels as we speak, as we see humans. She has grown up seeing angels, and they are more real to her than human beings. And she talks about these spiritual guides who are coming in abundance to the world to take humanity to a new level of consciousness. Is that thought that you resonate with? Do you think we are being prepared for something bigger?
We don't know the time frame. It might be 10 years, it might be 50 years, it might be 100 years, we don't know the time frame. But I think that there are a lot of benevolent beings. She might call them angels, I would call them Devis and Devas, who are, I think we probably would have destroyed ourselves before now had we not had that help.
And they're probably silently just guiding us through intuition, through dreams.
They're silently guiding us, but that doesn't mean that we won't encounter certain difficulties. Because there's a lot of resistance to change. People would rather keep what they have rather than change simply because it's familiar. We know what we got now. That's a common human sentiment. And that's why change is so slow, slow in human terms, not in the big scale of things. but I think that it's inevitable, it's inevitable that we will evolve as a human community and find a more awakened way of living with each other and on the earth, a more dharmic way of living. I think that's going to happen. But how, that's, and when, that's the question. Those are the questions.
Those are the questions to ask. I mean, having gone through all these lifetimes, right from the time of Krishna and Rama, when you saw the world as completely different, or certainly people were more spiritually aware. They were more connected to themselves, to this times when fear has become the dominant emotion, and intolerance and fear has become a dominant emotion. What are the lessons that we have missed? Why have we as humans come to this level? What do you think the lessons that we need to learn?
During the higher yugas, during the time of Ram, there was much less ego consciousness, individuation. There was much more of a sense of the collective. Even anthropologists will tell you this about earlier human societies. There were no wars, there was no slavery, there was no need to dominate. The consciousness of domination was not there. Didn't need to dominate nature. Men didn't need to dominate women. This just concept did not exist. People lived naturally, simply, in harmony, much more in tune with all the natural forces. But over time, you can see this beginning in Sita's time. You see it much more in Krishna and Rukmini's time, where there is that great war. In Ram's time, it was a limited battle, where they just focused on Ravan. Krishna's time, it was a massive war with all the kingdoms involved. And the violence and this need, which comes from a domination, is almost like a domination gene entered the human species. And then you have gender domination, economic domination, domination of one nation, conquest, expanding your territories, ethnic domination, one group better than the other, one religion, all these things. So I think what we need to outgrow now is this need to dominate, anybody dominating over anybody else, and also evolve our individuation to more into a collective good. I mean, you see even now playing out with this pandemic, my freedom versus what's the best for the whole. You see it playing out very strongly now. What is freedom? Is the freedom, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want? Or is it, I really have to consider what's in the best interests of the community? So this concept of freedom, we've gotten to an extreme point now where individuation and the sense of my freedom is now becoming very harmful. So I think we need a deep reflection on how to manage this, what the meaning of freedom is.
And I think we are being prepared for something. Certainly to view, like you said, the whole, it's such an profound thing that has been happening in the world, that the whole world is going through similar emotion. Whoever is you suddenly feel that this is my family, it's expanding to my community, and it's coming there. So do you think, it's like a circle, are we going towards that Satyuga again? You think that time, that golden age is coming?
I think that we will evolve toward that. I mean, we will pass through it, because that has to do with our orbit, the orbit of our solar system through the galaxy. But it's not around the corner. I mean, it's a long orbit that we have. And one Satyuga doesn't look like the previous Satyuga. We're at a different place. Yeah. I mean, the qualities in terms of being more aligned with Dharmic principles, they say in the Satyuga that there's a full alignment with Dharmic principles. In Treta Yuga, it's 75%. In Dwapara Yuga, it's 50%. In Kali Yuga, it's 25% in terms of alignment, individual and collective. So what does that mean? That means that you know how to behave, how to treat the earth, how to treat others. You're not driven by ego needs. You're in greater alignment with the whole, greater affinity and harmony. So now we're at a point. I mean, by modern calculations, we've come out of the Kali Yuga. We're early in the Dwapara Yuga. So we're moving in an upward swing toward that. But we, little by little, we have to take steps and opportunities. We have opportunities all the time. I mean, opportunities, with the pandemic, how to behave, how to be respectful of other people's health and well-being. So we're getting opportunities to expand beyond our limited self.
So I think this is the point where we can either go to its collective consciousness awakening or either go on the other side completely, where we all lose our mind and become even more fearful. So I think we are at that point where each one of us has an individual choice, which is ultimately affecting the collective choice.
Yes, and then we have a responsibility to the collective. The more we are filled with anger or fear, that to that degree we're putting that into the collective, into the collective mind. The more we are living in a space of just faith and contentment, that's the energy that we're putting into the collective field. So we're all adding to it. I've spent a number of years in my work at the Global Peace Initiative trying to understand collective karma. That's far more complex than individual karma. You look into your past and you can see why certain things are happening, and you can understand the law of cause and effect. But at a collective level, it's much more complex because you're dealing with masses of people. So we have to, and so that's just, you're talking about a nation. Now you're talking about the collective karma of the earth. How do we deal with that? I mean, we've done a lot of damage to a lot of life on earth. How do we balance that out now? How do we help life thrive on earth?
Dena, I know we're coming to the end of this thing very soon, but I want to ask you, having seen so much, having understood so much with such depth, and these teachings that come to you, these births that you have experienced, how difficult is it for you to stay in the present moment as you are very, very much here? But do you not find it difficult?
I did at first. At first, I found it very difficult. And I was a single mom raising 2 teenage boys, and I found it very difficult. Now it's not so difficult because I can be in many places at one time. And I think I think that's a natural evolution. I think that happens, that you can be in multiple places at one time. Now, for a master, you can actually appear in different bodies at the same time. You know, that's omnipresence, right? A master can be seen in different places. I can't do that, but my consciousness, and I think that there are exercises you can do to help that. You know, like in meditation, if a loved one is far away and you want to put yourself in that place, you visualize yourself being with your loved one at a distant place. These are just practices that help you enlarge your consciousness, so you're able to be. I mean, I often find myself, I'm writing, as I said, this book on 12th century Tibet, and this COVID time has been a blessing in that I've been home for 2 years. So I've been able to fully focus on this and fully immerse myself in that time period and listen to the teachings that are coming. So normally when I'm active in the world, it is a bit of a tension to find time to go back and see. But as I said the goal is to be able to be in many places at once.
And when you get these past life visions, do you see one birth at one time, or do you sometimes mix a couple of them and then you think, oh, wait a minute, that was then, this was here?
When I was writing the Rukmini book, I began to see the life in Tibet, which takes place, several thousand years later. The whole narrative began to unfold to me. And I said to myself, I'm not going to start writing this. I can't.
No. must have been so difficult. How do you manage all of that?
No, I saw it and I said, I took notes. I'm a copious note taker. If I hear conversations, I write them down, so I'll get the exact conversation. But I didn't allow myself to start writing until I really had put the Rukmini book to bed. So that has begun to happen to me where while I'm still working in one time period, I'll begin to see another. And as I said, there are so many interconnections. Every life has an impact on every other. So in one life, you will have people in your life. Maybe one of them comes from the life just previous. Another person comes from a life a few hundred years ago. Another person comes from a different time period. I mean, it's a compilation. It's like you are a compilation of everything that you've been, and the people in your life come from different yous, different parts of who you were.
Absolutely.
And a friend of mine once said at some point, who had read the book Journey Through Time, that she recognized me in all of those different personalities. And of course, I am different. I'm not that personality anymore. And I think that's the thing that you have to keep remembering. I'm not that person anymore because I've grown and I've learned and I've changed. But there are elements that I can recognize.
So you just see this person as a third person, that this is a story I'm writing. I deeply connect. I was that, but this is me. You have to stay in that truth all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you see people in your current lifetime whom you have seen in your past lifetime, how difficult has it become for you to interact with them? Because you certainly saw that this one has done something not nice, or maybe I was involved with this person in a romantic way. Well, in this lifetime, this one is a colleague. How do you manage that?
I think once the more you see, the more your vision expands, and the more you realize, in order to have completion, you can't hold on to anything. What happened at one time, you have to bring it to resolution, and if you don't bring it to resolution, then it will be. There's a future moment we'll have to come to resolution. So it's a matter of letting go. And I think much of our life is that, letting go of things that we've carried with us, attitudes, behaviors, troubled relationships. We have to let it all go in a very deep way, let it all go, or stay, otherwise it stays with us. And I think that's the deeper meaning of freedom. You're freeing yourself.
You're liberating yourself from any emotion.
From these things from the past,
Okay, and I'll just end this beautiful conversation because I'm aware that you have time. Is how has your relationship to the word death changed? What does death mean to you now? Certainly, because when you look at it, it's almost like your life has been just going on and on and on, and these were just like hiccups or resting times.
I think we're all moving toward that, no matter where you are. And when you're younger, you don't think about death, but at a certain point in your life, you're setting the blueprint for your future. For your early life, you're working out things from the past, but beyond midway, you're beginning to set the blueprint for the future. One can do that consciously or unconsciously. Much better to do it consciously, to set the blueprint for the future. When I think about death, there's always an instinctive, built-in resistance to change, right? So there's a part of one that no matter how beautiful you see that place, it's a change, and there's a jolting. There's a story in Yogananda's autobiography where his guru, the Hiri Bahasya, he sent a message that his time is coming, and as soon as he hears that, it's a message from his guru Babaji. He shudders, goes into meditation, and then opens his eyes after time and is fine. And somebody asks him about it, and he says, when a bird who's been in a cage, when the door is open, the bird pauses before flying out.
Oh, wow. How beautiful.
So before we fly out of a cage, there is a pause. I see those who've read my books, especially when you read the Rukmini book, know that I have a relationship with a being in that world. And so he's somebody that I'm a constant communion with. And so it's a coming home. It's a coming home to see that being that I look forward to.
And do you always, and do you tell these people that, I've known you in the past lifetime as this and this? No. How much difficult it must be for you to just keep the whole thing to yourself. That look, as much as I would have been tempted to.
Everybody has to discover it on their own. And by saying something, that's the problem. If you go to a past life regression and someone says, "Oh, you were Queen Elizabeth," what does that mean? Unless you experience it, it doesn't mean anything for someone to tell you.
Yes, absolutely. I completely resonate with that. So what's the next book that's coming, Dena, that you can read?
Well, the community book, which is a long saga. It's a long book of 3 different lifetimes, but Rukmini is the predominant figure. Will be out next month, and then later this year this book on Tibet, and then possibly one on the future. I think when I work with young people, I tell them that it's very important to create a vision now of the future they want to create. We create our own future personally and collectively. So collectively, we have to begin to set a foundation for the future of human society that we want to bring forth. And I'm thinking perhaps I could write a book that will help with that.
So you want to tell people to be more aware of the choices they make, and more aware of the choices that are available. Possibly we just don't think we have any choice available.
Exactly.
How interesting. If only the younger generation could be more aware, because this is a trend that I've been seeing, that earlier it was just certain section of people, gurus, who would talk about spirituality, and then you had the older generation who would certainly talk about stories, tell stories. There is a shift, that age gap is widening. I mean, you have younger people who are more spiritually aware. So I see where you're coming from, that yes, there is a need of making that flame come higher and brighter, and giving them that assurance that the world that they're seeing certainly exists. I mean, if I had that assurance when I was little, I would have had so much more power to myself. I mean, I never doubted it, but I never knew that it existed as well.
We have to empower them to manifest.
Yes.
And learning to manifest is a spiritual quality. And this is what I tell young people, is you have to learn to manifest. You start with manifesting small things. And this is the power of the will, manifesting small things in your life. It has to begin somewhere. And then as a collective, we can manifest something much larger.
And can I just ask you just one last question? I know I keep saying last question because it's such an interesting conversation. How important do you think it is for us to hold on to one icon of faith? For you, it was Yogananda, your guru, which kind of gave you the belief that you're being watched over. There is someone who's guiding you. And there was an anchor you could hold on to, from where you could then expand and go to all these adventures or explore yourself deeper. But because there is so much of influence of science and technology, and I'm not saying that science is any different than spirituality, sometimes people think that, I'm logical, I'm scientific, I don't have time for this, or I don't want to indulge much in this, and they don't have it. They grow up as these confused beings who don't have an anchor to hold on to. So how important do you think is it for children to tell them to hold on to some faith? It could be an angel, some unknown guide who's being there, who's guiding you.
In the ancient times, there was no religion. There was the science of spirituality. And I think we're moving toward that, where young people I think we can see a time when there'll be a convergence of spirituality and science. And the shift that has to take place is the shift from believing that matter gives rise to consciousness to knowing that consciousness gives rise to matter.
Wow.
That's it. And once that takes place, a lot will change. And I think that young people are not looking for doctrine. They're not looking for someone to tell them what to believe. They're looking to find their own truth. And that's why meditation has become so popular. People want practices where they can go and find for themselves. So I think we're coming to the end of the time where people are going to believe, at least the large number of people are going to believe what the priest tells them to believe, or that, they're not going to accept that. It's not relevant to them, not relevant for their lives. And I think speaking in more scientific terms, which is the benefit of yogic meditation, there's a science to it. All meditation, there's a science to it. Something happens with the brain circuitry. When you do mantras, when you do pranayama, something happens to the brains. And so, there've been a lot of tests on meditators that have confirmed this. So I think the younger people will take a more scientific approach. Doesn't matter, it'll get them to the same place.
Yes. And you do see a future where we will have more harmony.
A future, but of course there's no time frame to that future.
But it's still there somewhere.
It's there.
we just have to move towards it in whatever pace we can, but at least move towards the right direction. Wow. So thank you so much, Dena. It's been such a pleasure. I mean, there are so many more questions. I will probably invite you again.
You and I will speak again when I've read your book.